there's one thing we need less than a film based on a flimsy premise, it's 2 films based on a flimsy premise. If you think I'm talking about Prom Night, you'd be wrong. I'm talking about Zontar, the thing from Venus. When your title references a character from the film as a thing, you know your writers are useless. Although in their defense, Zontar the Venetian would have sounded like an Italian film, I guess. 3 reasons to be immediately concerned. First, this 1966 made-for-TV movie is a remake of Roger Corman's It Conquered the World. Anyone the slightest bit familiar with Roger Corman's work knows that this means the source material is already a bit questionable. Second, it was made for TV, which, let's face it, that's always a reason to be nervous. Third, it was made to pad out a syndication package for American international television, so we know the motivation for it to actually be good is simply not there. Zontar, the Thing from Venus, stars John Agar of classic westerns and Mr. Shirley Temple fame, and, let's face it, a bunch of other people you most likely have never heard of, but if you insist on knowing, we have Susan Berman, Anthony Houston, Pat Delaney, Neil Fletcher, Bill Thurman, etc., etc. I tried to warn you. Well, actually, you may have heard of Bill Thurman if you happen to remember the air traffic controller from Close Encounters of the Third Kind. If so, then I take it back. You have heard of somebody from this film, but probably nobody else, and I have a feeling we're about to find out why. 3 minutes until the launch of something that costs $50 million, which I will point out as a fun fact is over 2,272 times the estimated budget for this entire film.
You know, it's strange. After all this time and money and work, the laser satellite is finally ready to go.
Oh, you're not gonna sing, are you? Keith bursts in and tries to force them to stop the launch because supposedly a previous secret laser communication satellite that was launched sometime before exploded because the creatures from the other planets were warning us to stay away.
They'll do something, anything to keep us from communicating.
They launch it anyway, and I think this golden nipple thing floating off screen is supposed to be it. 3 months later, Keith is having a dinner party, and Kurt asks if Keith has given up on his mixed feelings about the launch.
Hardly. It's still of great interest to me. Among other things.
Wow, that only means one thing. Someone has not been laid in a while.
So can't you two talk about anything else?
I'm just a stupid woman after all. Keith wants to reveal something that his wife is begging him not to tell, so the menfolk go into the other room. Check out this super secret panel. Keith claims this radio is communicating with Venus via laser communication without the satellite.
Can't you hear it? The other thing?
It's in the back of your head telling you that this guy is full of crap. Keith says they are communicating with him via some sort of hyperspace hypnotism. He doesn't know how he understands, but he does. The creature from Venus is named Zontar. The phone rings. It seems the satellite has disappeared, so Kurt has to go. Keith begins telling nobody in particular that Zontar got rid of the satellite, and Zontar will soon be there.
Raise the vernier on the C-band link.
I'm willing to bet that phrase means absolutely nothing. Keith's wife asks Keith to come out of it and come back. The satellite suddenly reappears as if nothing had ever happened. Keith talks to Zantar, acknowledging that he is Zontar's only friend. Something tells me Zontar is Keith's only friend, too. He says Zontar is on the satellite heading for Earth to save us. Oh yeah, that philosophy worked real well for the Heaven's Gate cult. Later, Keith's wife comes out to the living room to put a blanket on her sleeping husband. He's adorable when he sleeps. Well, he's tolerable when he sleeps.
Are you people positive you know what you're doing?
I wish somebody had thought to ask that before the movie started. The scientists are ready to bring the satellite back to Earth. They realize how far away Venus is, right? The satellite is coming towards Earth, but is apparently making its own route without the guidance of the computers.
Zontar landed the satellite in a cave. They couldn't even track him.
Keith!
The world has been headed downhill for a long time.
Keith seems to think that Zontar will stop war and violence on Earth. Do you suppose this is how L. Ron Hubbard started Scientology? Keith tells Zontar to stay near some hot spring so it'll be similar to his environment on Venus. For the record, the ground temperature of Venus is over 800 degrees and has an atmosphere made of carbon dioxide and sulfuric acid. What the hell kind of hot springs do you have in this town? Of course, we know from movies like this that aliens in our atmosphere stop all electronics. How do aliens develop technology when all power goes berserk when they're nearby? Kurt and his wife are stranded by their car losing power, so they start walking.
No, I've got a premonition.
Oh, don't be foolish. Come on.
What, you're gonna reject it before she even tells you what it is? Men. Apparently Keith predicted this part. He is now telling Zontar who all of the important people are in town so Zontar can control them. The shadow of Zontar! Oh, wait. No, it looks like it's just lousy cinematography. We see a vague shape in the dark and then people running, except for this guy who can't be bothered.
My husband is in an iron lung. Stop. What shall I do?
My husband is in an iron lung. Stop. What shall I do? Is she reading her lines off of a telegram? Keith fetches his wife from the random runners and says his car is the only one which hasn't been de-energized.
Say goodbye, Mr. Energizer Bunny.
Shut up, Rip Torn. Meanwhile, some ugly thing is flying around Kurt and his wife, and they don't like it. Keith brings his wife home. That's when she decides to ask what he meant when he said the car hadn't been de-energized. You just rode home in it, isn't that definition enough? Zantar, it seems, has stopped all power at its source, including water and steam, except for their house. Kurt and his wife randomly meander over and ask for a ride to the garage.
I will ask you inside for a drink.
You look all in.
No, they're out. That's why you have to invite them in. Keith is baiting Kurt in the most irritating way smug people do about the car not starting. Silly music begins playing, this random image of a woman in a bathing suit fades in, and then we go to these guys.
The Jeep don't work, so he walked. Funny seeing a general walk. He hardly knows how.
Oh, army humor.
We're all puzzled. And just a little bit afraid.
Yeah, sure. Gimme.
I feel like the movie just got hijacked. The general is walking and sees what appears to be a flying fish. So he begins shooting at it, and it flies around him and then bumps into his head. The music tells us this moment is supposed to be more tragic than it appears. I am getting such mixed messages from this movie, I don't know how to feel anymore.
No one ever believed me.
He says that like some pouty 8-year-old who's mad nobody believes him about the dog eating his homework. Keith defends himself by saying he thinks Zontar and his superior intelligence have come to save humans from themselves.
Oh, yes. They're real chums.
Yet she's still married to him. Think about that. Kurt asks for a ride home.
Nothing quite like a logical, orderly, scientific mind.
Jealous much? You should be.
You can trace my car through the energy pulses you supply it. But his mind is of the utmost value to us.
Wait, your car has a mind?
My mother car.
Oh god, the movie's been hijacked again. The general says the area is now under his command. The camera zooms in on the back of the general's neck, and I think we're supposed to figure the flying fish thing put something on him that is now controlling him, I guess. Why are we only watching the back of his head this entire time? Maybe the actor couldn't memorize his lines? The zombie general tells the scientists that the sabotage of all the power is due to some communist uprising. The scientists are under protective custody and restricted to that building until further notice.
There's blankets and canned goods in the closet there. We'll make out.
Kurt and his wife return to their Mad Men living room and discuss whether Keith could be right or not. Kurt thinks Keith is saying this to gain his reputation as a credible source back. It seems that the Zantar story is what made him lose his reputation in the first place, so using that same story to gain it back seems like a lousy plan. We still don't know why everybody's running, or walking very briskly. Kurt tackles a guy to ask, but he breaks away. Maybe there's a sale at Penny's.
I saw a funny-looking boy.
Oh my god, stop interrupting the movie. Kurt grabs a bicycle and heads for the lab, and a big ugly flying fish tags the policeman next. He throws the fish in a trash can and shoots the one old guy left in town. Kurt witnesses it, and the cop says he did it under orders from Zontar. Since Kurt is to become one of them, The cop lets him go. Meanwhile, back at Chez Cray Cray, Keith explains more of Zontar's operation to his wife. Apparently, the big ugly flying fish guys are pieces of Zantar flying around.
There are no victims, darling. According to Zantar, they carry with them an electrobiological essence of himself, the host. They plant this activated growth in the person's neck.
If you have to plant an activated growth on someone to gain their control, then yes, that makes them a victim, numbnuts.
It's a little like radio, except that it's biological, too. That is, the person actually becomes a living extension of Zontar, actually becomes part of Zontar.
This is when you back away slowly and see if the divorce lawyer has walked briskly out of town yet. Keith's wife complains that the person loses their mind and will in this process.
Their minds are clearer than they ever thought possible. All the human waste is gone, the greed, the bitterness, all the foolish nonsense.
Keith's very bitter about bitterness. I didn't know that was possible.
I don't know why you should, from what you say.
Come back into the shot, sweetheart. There you go. Kurt reaches the installation and the general tells him it's closed. It seems the general had time to learn his lines while we were away from him. The general offers him a ride back to town. Kurt gets suspicious and knocks the general out by karate chopping him on the back. If you saw the thing on the back of his neck, why didn't you try at least pulling it out first? Kurt drives the Jeep to Keith's house. Keith admits to helping Zontar come to Earth. Apparently, Zontar's race is dependent on host creatures, the original of which died out on Venus. So now they're here on Earth to make humans their new hosts. Kurt tries to convince Keith that this is a bad idea.
In the last 12 hours, men have been murdered for failing to obey this new master.
Well, how many? Let's count. One. Unless you're thinking the general is murdered, in that case too, but you did that one, so that technically doesn't count, so 1. Keith says Zantar wants Kurt to join them. Kurt refuses and storms out.
Despite all our fights and disagreements, he was still my best friend.
Is that all you can think of, losing a friend?
Did I say that out loud?
What about losing yourself?
Keith's wife tells him that Kurt is the best friend he's ever had because Kurt should have killed Keith. She says she loves him, then screams she can't love a monster, and then lets him hold her. She seems very confused right now. Keith tells Zontar that Kurt must be controlled. Kurt's Jeep, I guess, is supposed to have died right there, but he doesn't seem very fazed by it and takes off on his bicycle. He returns home and his wife is not in the room in the first shot. Pro tip, that means something's wrong. Sure enough.
Present.
Kurt is able to kill the flying turd fish, and his phone rings. He is very calm for someone whose obviously possessed wife just threw a flying shit fish at him.
This has got to be Keith.
Right. I have the only working phone left.
Well, no, clearly his phone works too because you were able to call him. See, it doesn't do you any good if you are the only one in town with a working phone because you can't call anyone. Logic.
He said you've killed the injectopod that he grew for you.
Do you know what Zontar went through to grow that injectopod?
That means you can't be controlled for several hours. Come on over. I want to talk to you. It's terribly important.
Oh, that's not suspicious.
How'll I get there?
You just bicycled home. Kurt agrees to come over after he does something. Sure enough, Keith admits to his wife that he's gonna have to kill Kurt. Kurt's wife returns and says they must wait for their instructions from Zantar for the next step in the conquest of the world and... Geez, at least try taking the thing out of her neck first. And the movie's been hijacked again. Why is she sticking around when all she's doing is teasing him about murdering people? At least she's all dressed for her new job on the SS Enterprise. Keith's wife points out that if Zontar needs to live in the cave with a hot spring to survive, then Earth is of no use to him except as a conquest. That's a good point, Keith. No, Keith ignores that. He tells her that 3 of the 8 injectopods sent out were not successful. Kurt's, the mayor's, and the mayor's wife. The last 2 were apparently killed during the evacuation, which is apparently what this nonsense was. Keith says their injectopods were used on other people. I would say obviously they were used on these two scientists, but they're just as boring as they were before, so maybe not. The female scientist is amazed that the lab machines are working again. One of the scientists strangles the female scientist, who is able to scream astonishingly loud while being strangled. Keith won't listen to his wife, so the wife gets on the radio and tells Zontar that she hates him and she will kill him. She gets a gun and steals the car Kurt drove up in. Meanwhile, Kurt tells Keith that he killed his wife. So if we're keeping track here, the murder count is now Zontar 2, Kurt 2. Who's the worst one here? Keith says Zontar praised his work on Earth. Kurt says Zontar was playing on Keith's human emotions to manipulate him. Keith's wife... Oh shit, we're hijacked again. Anyway, Keith's wife drives to the cave with the hot spring. That's not a cave so much as... What is that, a porch built in front of a viaduct?
I don't know, Kurt. For the first time, I'm confused.
Really? For the first time? I kinda doubt that. Keith's wife wanders into the well-lit cave. Kurt threatens to kill Keith, who tells Kurt that he was supposed to kill him, too, under Zontar's orders.
Whatever you are, I've come here to kill you.
Always a solid plan. Announce your murderous intentions into the void and the victim will come out to what the fuck? Zontar, buddy, maybe you should cool off a bit. Your face is starting to run. Keith hears his wife scream through the radio thing. He apparently now realizes the error of his ways and tells his wife to run, which she doesn't really run, but meanders away and gets lost.
You're slimy, horrible.
Supposedly Zantar doesn't have feelings, so insulting him is probably not going to be all that effective. Just a thought. She shoots him. Well, she shoots the gun a couple times, so I'm assuming she either missed or they're trying to make out that he's bulletproof. Of course, running away is not an option at this point, because that would just make too much sense. She screams as Zontar eats her, slowly walks into her, something... Well, I think she died. Now that his wife is dead, Keith agrees to help Kurt kill Zontar.
Guns won't hurt him, Kurt, but I've got something that will.
My book of Shakespearean insults. No, he's apparently talking about this thing. Sure. Movie hijack! Kurt drives Keith to the cave and then takes off. Kurt continues on to the installation, shoots the controlled scientists in general, who falls on some electrical equipment, and something seems to start to happen that they don't elaborate on. The movie hijackers go into the cave while Keith zaps the controlled cop with his magic stick thing. One hijacker is killed by Zontar, and the rest run away. Keith, who is surprisingly unsurprised by Zontar's appearance, gives a triumphant speech to Zantar before letting Zantar hug him as he zaps Zantar to death. A hijacker tells Kurt that both Keith and Zantar are dead. I'm not sure why he couldn't try zapping him from farther away like he did the cop, but so be it. Kurt gives us a speech about learning and being smart on our own. You see, movie, if we were smart on our own, we wouldn't have watched this nonsense in the first place. There's little to no information on the reception of this movie at the time of its release, but I have a feeling I can guess how well it was received just by having viewed it. So why is it in the dumpster? Well, what else do you do when you have a laughable movie premise, decide to rip it off, cast bad actors, bad special effects, bad jokes, and bad everything? You throw it in the dumpster. It's as simple as that. With all of the writers out there in the world, you would think Hollywood would not feel the need to remake other films, especially this early in Hollywood history. The fact that there are people out there still able to make original films says that there are original films to be made. So why is Hollywood insisting on rehashing old crap or taking classics and making them, at best, not better than the original or, in most cases, total crap? Is Hollywood lazy? Greedy? Unimaginative? Out of touch? Yes, why are you asking such obvious questions? Some say that remaking a classic brings the film before a younger audience and makes them interested in older films in general. But does it? Does it really? How many young people know that House of Wax was a Vincent Price classic and not some piece of shit where the only redeeming quality was that they killed off Paris Hilton? Spoiler alert, no, I just saved you a couple of hours. You're welcome. How many younger audiences know that Arthur was supposed to be Dudley Moore as a lovably flawed goof and not Russell Brand as a total waste of space? Or that The Haunting was supposed to be a thought-provoking psychological thriller and not some weird horror ripoff about dead children and bad CGI? Look at all this time I'm saving you. Though there are many remakes that are universally panned or universally praised, many are really a matter of opinion. Many people like the remake of Ocean's 11, but there are those of us who feel that the remake took an original idea, brilliant in its ingenuity, and turned it into a complicated heist movie that looks like somebody dropped all of the Mission Impossible movies on the cutting room floor. Now don't get me wrong, Ocean's 11 the remake is a decent film in its own right, but when you look at it as a remake of the classic with the Rat Pack, you can't help but think the original was made correctly. Don't try to fix it. Make up your own goddamn movie. Come on, Hollywood, choose your own adventure for once. Don't remake classics that don't need to be remade, and certainly leave the crappy things alone when they're crap down to their very foundation. As far as Zontar, the thing from Venus, bleh.
How about I go rustle up some cattle?
I'll be serious.
Would you believe chicken?